Hello, everyone. My name is Tooways Asmal. Welcome to another episode of Tooways to Skin a Cat, a show where we talk career experiences, entrepreneurship, and investments. The main aim is to show that there's more than one way to be successful other than just climbing the corporate ladder. Now, we are live on LinkedIn and YouTube, and the show will be available on podcast by tomorrow. We've had some issues with LinkedIn in the last few episodes where the comments haven't come through, so I apologize. If there is someone who's watching on LinkedIn, please uh, type something in the comments and let's see if the comments finally come through. We've tried to resolve that issue. If you're watching live, drop a one in the comments and drop a two in the comments if you're watching the recording. So today, I'll be talking about business travel tips for young professionals. This is for someone who's going on their first business flight and needs some guidance, or someone who has done a few trips and wants to save time and reduce the anxiety. There's some of us who've never, or some of you've never traveled before, and sometimes we don't know what questions to ask. So that's what we'll be talking about. Now, when you first start working, traveling for business sounds kind of fancy. It makes you feel a bit rich, or it used to make me feel rich at least, and rich and important. But those feelings fall away after your third or fourth consecutive trip. If you've been doing it often, it disappears very quickly. If it's once every now and then, it's still fine. But if you do weeks and weeks of traveling, it disappears quickly. I've done all kinds of business trips between Cape Town, Johannesburg, Durban, and even Gaborone. I flew in for meetings and left the same day. I've stayed for as short as a few hours and for as long as 2 to 3 weeks and everything in between. I've flown for 2 hour meetings and for 4 week audit jobs. I've flown in at the beginning of the week, so the Monday, and flown out at the end of the week for 4 weeks straight. I've even flown the Sunday before for 4 weeks straight. And I've flown between 3 cities in 3 days. It's messy. There are certain parts of Johannesburg that I never want to see again. I've spent too much time in the trenches auditing there. I've also tried everything on the McDonald's menu there because that was the only thing I could eat at a reasonable distance. Something that's important to note is being able to read maps help. Yes, I'm talking about Google Maps, but I'm also talking about like physical maps if worst comes to worst. Being good with directions help. Having a co-pilot who can guide you when driving also helps. Having a bad co-pilot can make things go wrong very quickly. But now, even if you are not great at reading maps and you are not great at directions, Google Maps is your friend. It can get you to most places that you need to go. I think in Joburg, I would be completely lost without it. Now, if you're flying for the first time, it helps if you don't take your first flight alone. Hopefully, a senior can travel with you, especially if you're like a first or a second year trainee. It reduces the anxiety a lot. That anxiety of the unknown reduces because you get to follow someone's lead who's done it before. If you work for a big company, you might have someone who's responsible for booking your flights, cars, and accommodation. When you work for smaller companies, you might end up having to do those bookings yourself, either on the company card or on your own personal card where you have to claim an expense reimbursement. Now, if you're doing your own bookings, learning to plan your trip becomes very important. Consider travel time between meetings. Consider travel time from the airport to your first meeting. Consider finding somewhere to grab lunch. Don't book back-to-back meetings the whole day without making space to eat, because by 3 o'clock, if you haven't had lunch, or I'm a person who eats on time, so if I haven't had lunch by 4 o'clock, I'm hangry, not hungry, hangry. Make sure you make time for traffic between your last meeting and the airport to avoid missing your flight. Make time for traffic between the airport and your first meeting to avoid missing your first meeting. For most local flights, you need to be at the airport by latest an hour before the flight. You can push this a bit if you check in online and you don't have luggage to check in, but don't push it too much. I mean, you can get there with 30 minutes to spare, but then you're pushing it and you're in a rush. You don't want to be in a rush when you get on a plane. Any delays on the way to the airport could lead you to missing your flight or just unnecessary stress. If you are lucky enough to have airport lounge access, rather get to the airport earlier than you need to, and maybe then you can work or relax in the airport lounge. It eliminates most of the stress of rushing for a flight. And how do you get access to those airport lounges? So if you're an audit trainee, There's a bank or two that will take you on as a client that should give you airport lounge access. Now, let's say you're flying in the morning. Don't book your first meeting anywhere between 8 a.m. and 9:30 p.m. because if you take the first flight out at 6 a.m., you'll be landing at 8. And then you still need time to get your bags, or even if you don't have bags, to get through traffic to get to your meeting. So if you're taking the 6 o'clock flight and if you're landing at 8 o'clock, 10 a.m. is probably the earliest you should book a meeting if you're flying in the morning. But even that is pushing it. The other problem is that if you have a 6 a.m. flight, you need to be at the airport at 5 a.m. So you likely need to be waking up at 3:30 or 4 a.m. Sorry. And if you wake up that early, your brain won't be able to function for the whole day. By 2 p.m., it might be switching off because 2 p.m. is basically your normal 5 p.m. because you've woken up 3 hours before you normally wake up. You'll be exhausted. I prefer scheduling an 11 a.m. meeting and maybe a 7, maybe an 8 a.m. flight so that I'm more refreshed, especially if I have afternoon meetings. Now, obviously, sometimes time is of the essence and you have to have that 8 a.m. flight. Rather than flying the night before, then you'll be fresh for the first meeting of the day. If you do fly in the night before, try and book the early or mid-afternoon flight because if you book a late afternoon or evening flight, you get to your destination city late in the evening in your hotel even later, then you don't get as much sleep as you like. You're already sleeping in abnormal surroundings, and some people struggle to fall asleep in new surroundings. So you don't want to get there late, struggle to sleep. By the time you fall asleep, it's like 2 in the morning, and then you have to wake up early again, and you didn't get much sleep. Then you might as well have just flown in the morning because you're also reducing your sleeping time. If you're flying up and down every week, Monday to Friday for a few weeks, this might help save you. So try to keep some sort of exercise routine in place. Because you'll probably end up eating a lot of takeaways or even restaurant food. And if you don't exercise, you will pick up weight. There are pros and cons. Let's say if you're flying up Monday, if you need to work a full week somewhere else, if you're flying up Monday and flying up the Friday, so working a full week at a destination, there are pros and cons to flying out Sunday night versus flying Monday morning. So flying out Sunday evenings means you're ready for work first thing Monday morning. But if you've just flown home the Friday before, you probably flew home the evening, so you don't do much Friday evening because you're tired. You end up doing washing the Saturday and packing the Sunday. So you basically have no weekend to rest or spend time with the important people in your life. If you fly out Monday mornings, you get to spend your weekend better. But you will be exhausted on Monday afternoon if you travel early Monday morning. Unless you can get a slightly later flight, but then you risk losing half your day. So if you've got an 8 o'clock flight, you get there 10 o'clock. By the time you get to the location, it's 11, 12 o'clock. Half the day is gone. So one thing I can tell you is that the most depressing place to be is at OR Tambo International Airport on a Friday afternoon waiting to get your flight home. You can feel the energy of the people. Nobody wants to be there. Everyone just wants to get home. If you do have any questions, I'll try and respond to the questions towards the end. So please add your questions to the comment section now so that we don't miss them. If there's still an issue with the LinkedIn comments, I'll try and respond to the questions after the live. I talked a lot now about traveling, and that's more, and it's applicable to most, but sometimes you're not traveling on your own. So let's say you're traveling with a team. If you are traveling with a team, it helps to get to know them a bit because you're going to be spending work hours, lunch hours, breakfasts, and suppers with them. So you at least don't want to be stuck with a miserable bunch of people. There's nothing more miserable than being stuck with people you don't get along with. Remember, you're all in the same boat, so you might as well make the best of it. Also, use the time to strengthen your network with those people. You will always have that experience with them, so you end up being closer with them than those that you don't travel with. I have mostly fond memories of the teams that I've traveled with and the adventures that we went on after work. Yes, you might go and some of you are lucky enough that you might go and see friends in the evening, but there will be times where you'll spend time with your team. Another list of quick tips. So make sure you save your slips, your expense slips. If you have no proof, you can't claim it. Remember to manage your cash flow. So I use a credit card for this, and then I make sure I submit my expense claim and receive my reimbursement before my credit card payment is deducted off my account. That's why I receive the reimbursement, and that pays for my credit card. If you are going to use a credit card, make sure you make the full payment and not a portion. Don't pay off the full amount. This is to avoid being caught in that endless interest trap. When I first started, I was caught out a few times with bad timing and not keeping my slips, and I paid heavily for that because I might have had to book flights and accommodation, and that comes off my account, and I haven't received my reimbursement yet. Now I either have to go into overdraft or there's not enough money, and it becomes a problem. So you can pay for that. Another tip is to check in online 24 hours before your flight to save you time in getting to the airport, so you can get to the airport a little bit later, and you can pick a seat that you prefer. I've never met anyone who actually likes the middle seat. So most people either like an aisle or a window, and you don't want to be stuck in the middle seat. Also, if you pick a seat closer to the front, you're able to get on quicker and get off the plane quicker. So the quicker you get off, the quicker you can get to your destination. The people right at the back have to wait for everybody to get off. And if you don't have any carry-on, if you've only got carry-on luggage and you haven't checked luggage in, if you're in the front, you get to your destination quicker. Obviously, if you have to pick up luggage that you've checked in, it's probably going to be the same time. So you're not going to save that much time. Now, if you're traveling for only 1 to 3 nights, try to pack light and only bring carry-on luggage. That way you can get to the departure airport later and leave where you land quicker. So this saves you time from having to wait for luggage to be off-boarded from the plane. And it's all about saving time. For me, like, just waiting frustrates me. But that's just me. I also try to pack clothes and shoes that can be worn in different scenarios to avoid overpacking. So, if you need to wear shirts and pants for work, wear ones that you can also wear out for supper, or things that you obviously unnecessary shoes or it's just going to make your bag bigger, and then you're going to need to check in your luggage. So don't overpack unless you're going to the bush. So if some clothes don't get spoiled, there will be a clothing store nearby to find a replacement. So don't pack things just in case. Pack just enough for what you need. If you're going to a city, there's going to be a retail store if something goes wrong. So don't pack just in case, because you don't need to. One thing that I would also do is set up a travel list of things you'll always need when you travel. This way you never forget those small things that you might need. It also makes packing much quicker because you don't need to think about what to pack. I basically set up my list in 2008 when I first started traveling, and I still use that same list today. I've made a few minor additions and a few minor adjustments, but I basically use that same list. Even when I go on holiday, I use that list. I don't have to think. Just check the list and it works. If you are flying up specifically for one meeting, try to set up other meetings or networking sessions to make your trip more valuable. If you are traveling with a team or with a colleague, don't assume that they have the same expectations that you have. So always keep the communication lines open before, during, and after the trip so that things go as smoothly as possible. A small WhatsApp saying, "I've reached home safely," is a good way to end the trip. So think about that. Also remember that Also remember that with traveling, something will go wrong. It always does. It might be as big as a flight cancellation or traffic making you miss your flight, or as small as you forgot your toothbrush. Sometimes a few things can go wrong at once. How you deal with that is what matters more than the problem itself. And if you take nothing else from whatever I said, my most important travel tip is avoid flying in and out on the same day, because that change in altitude will mess with you. I always end up sick the next few days, or at best exhausted. Rather stay the night before or the night after. Yes, it'll be more expensive because you'll need to pay for accommodation, but it's cheaper than the time you lose being sick, and the time that you have to pay to go to the doctor, and the cost that you have to pay for the doctor, and being exhausted afterwards. Sometimes you can also find a place to stay with one of your friends if budget is an issue. Like I said, I don't see any questions, so there might be questions raised on LinkedIn, and I'll try and answer them after the session. In closing, remember that traveling is an experience. It opens your mind and can change your perspective. It can either be a good experience or a bad experience. Your perspective of how you deal with it is important, especially when things go wrong. I don't travel as much as I used to, and I miss it. But I think that is a good way for us to end. The show has been live on YouTube and should be available on podcast by tomorrow. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on the podcast and you feel that this has added value, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on that notification bell to get automatically notified when the next episode comes out. Thank you very much for joining me for another episode of Two Ways to Skin a Cat. Goodbye.